Chapter 23 of The House of a Thousand Candles. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The House of a Thousand Candles by Meredith Nicholson. Chapter 23. The Door of Bewilderment. We had established the practice of barring all the gates and doors at nightfall. There was no way of guarding against an attack from the lake, whose frozen surface increased the danger from without, but we counted on our night patrol to prevent a surprise from that quarter. I was well aware that I must prepare to resist the militant arm of the law, which Pickering would no doubt invoke to aid him, but I intended to exhaust the possibilities in searching for the lost treasure before I yielded. Pickering might, if he would, transfer the estate of John Marshall Glenarm to Marian Devereux and make the most he could of that service, but he could not drive me forth until I had satisfied myself of the exact character of my grandfather's fortune. If it had vanished, if Pickering had stolen it and outwitted me in making off with it, that was another matter. The phrase, "the door of bewilderment," had never ceased to reiterate itself in my mind. We discussed 1,000 explanations of it as we pondered over the scrap of paper I had found in the library, and every book in the house was examined in the search for further clues. The passage between the house and the chapel seemed to fascinate Larry. He held that it must have some particular use, and he devoted his time to exploring it. He came up at noon. It was the 29th of December, with grimy face and hands and a grin on his face. I had spent my morning in the towers, where it was beastly cold, to no purpose, and was not in a mood for the ready acceptance of new theories. "I've found something," he said, filling his pipe. "Not soap, evidently." "No, but I'm going to say the last word on the tunnel, and within an hour. Give me a glass of beer and a piece of bread, and we'll go back and see whether we're sold again or not." "Let us explore the idea and be done with it. Wait till I tell Stoddard where we're going." The chaplain was trying the second-floor walls, and I asked him to eat some luncheon and stand guard while Larry and I went to the tunnel. We took with us an iron bar, an axe, and a couple of hammers. Larry went ahead with a lantern. "You see," he explained as we dropped through the trap into the passage, "I've tried a compass on this tunnel and find that we've been working on the wrong theory. The passage itself runs a straight line from the house under the gate to the crypt. The ravine is a rough crescent shape, and for a short distance the tunnel touches it. How deep does that ravine average? About 30 feet? "Yes, it's shallowest where the house stands. It drops sharply from there on to the lake." "Very good. But the ravine is not all on the Glenarm side of the wall, isn't it? Now, when we get under the wall, I'll show you something." "Here we are," said Larry, as the cold air blew in through the hollow posts. "Now we're pretty near that sharp curve of the ravine that dips away from the wall. Take that lantern while I get out the compass. What do you think that C on the piece of paper means? Why, chapel, of course. I have measured the distance from the house, the point of departure, we may assume, to the chapel, and 3/4 of it brings us under those beautiful posts. The directions are as plain as daylight. The passage itself is your N.W., as the compass proves, and the ravine cuts close in here. Therefore, our business is to explore the wall on the ravine side." "Good. But this is just wall here, earth with a layer of brick and a thin coat of cement. A nice job it must have been to do the work, and it cost the price of a tiger hunt," I grumbled. "Take heart, lad, and listen." And Larry began pounding the wall with a hammer, exactly under the north gate-post. We had sounded everything in and about the house until the process bored me. "Hurry up and get through with it," I jerked impatiently, holding the lantern at the level of his head. It was sharply cold under the posts, and I was anxious to prove the worthlessness of his idea and be done. Thump, thump. "There's a place here that sounds a trifle off-key. You try it." I snatched the hammer and repeated his soundings. Thump, thump. There was a space about 4 feet square in the wall that certainly gave forth a hollow sound. "Stand back!" exclaimed Larry eagerly. "Here goes with the axe." He struck into the wall sharply, and the cement chipped off in rough pieces, disclosing the brick beneath. Larry paused when he had uncovered a foot of the inner layer and examined the surface. "They're loose. These bricks are loose, and there's something besides earth behind them." I snatched the hammer and drove hard at the wall. The bricks were set up without mortar, and I plucked them out and rapped with my knuckles on a wooden surface. Even Larry grew excited as we flung out the bricks. "Ah, lad," he said, The old gentleman had a way with him. He had a way with him. A brick dropped on his foot, and he howled in pain. Bless the old gentleman's heart! He made it as easy for us as he could. Now for the Glenarm millions. Red money, and all piled up for the ease of counting it. £1,000 in every pile. Don't be a fool, Larry, I coughed at him, for the brick dust and the smoke of Larry's pipe made breathing difficult. That's all the loose brick. Bring the lantern closer. And we peered through the aperture upon a wooden door, in which strips of iron were deep set. It was fastened with a padlock, and Larry reached down for the axe. Wait, I called, drawing nearer with the lantern. What's this? The wood of the door was fresh and white, but burned deep on the surface in this order were the words, "The Door of Bewilderment." "There are dead men inside, I dare say. Here, my lad, it's not for me to loose the family skeletons." And Larry stood aside while I swung the axe and brought it down with a crash on the padlock. It was of no flimsy stuff, and the remaining bricks cramped me, but half a dozen blows broke it off. "The house of 1,000 ghosts," chanted the irrepressible Larry, as I pushed the door open and crawled through. Whatever the place was, it had a floor, and I set my feet firmly upon it and turned to take the lantern. "Hold a bit!" he exclaimed. "Someone's coming!" And bending toward the opening, I heard the sound of steps down the corridor. In a moment Bates ran up, calling my name with more spirit than I imagined possible in him. "What is it?" I demanded, crawling out into the tunnel. "It's Mr. Pickering. The sheriff has come with him, sir." As he spoke, his glance fell upon the broken wall and open door. The light of Larry's lantern struck full upon him. Amazement, and I thought a certain satisfaction, were marked upon his countenance. "Run along, Jack. I'll be up a little later," said Larry. "If the fellow has come in daylight with the sheriff, he isn't dangerous. It's his friends that shoot in the dark that give us the trouble." I crawled out and stood upright. Bates, staring at the opening, seemed reluctant to leave the spot. "You seem to have found it, sir," he said. I thought a little chokingly. His interest in the matter nettled me, for my first business was to go above for an interview with the executor, and the value of our discovery was secondary. "Of course we have found it!" I ejaculated, brushing the dust from my clothes. "Is Mr. Stoddard in the library?" "Oh, yes, sir. I left him entertaining the gentlemen." "Their visit is certainly most inopportune," said Larry. "Give them my compliments, and tell them I'll be up as soon as I've articulated the bones of my friend's ancestors." Bates strode on ahead of me with his lantern, and I left Larry crawling through the new-found door as I hurried toward the house. I knew him well enough to be sure he would not leave the spot until he had found what lay behind the Door of Bewilderment. "You didn't tell the callers where you expected to find me, did you?" I asked Bates, as he brushed me off in the kitchen. "No, sir. Mr. Stoddard received the gentleman. He rang the bell for me, and when I went into the library he was saying, 'Mr. Glenarm is at his studies. Bates,' he says, 'kindly tell Mr. Glenarm that I'm sorry to interrupt him, but won't he please come down?' I thought it rather neat, sir, considering his clerical office. I knew you were below somewhere, sir. The trap door was open, and I found you easily enough." Bates' eyes were brighter than I had ever seen them. A certain buoyant note gave an entirely new tone to his voice. He walked ahead of me to the library door, threw it open, and stood aside. "Here you are, Glenarm," said Stoddard. Pickering and a stranger stood near the fireplace in their overcoats. Pickering advanced and offered his hand, but I turned away from him without taking it. His companion, a burly countryman, stood staring, a paper in his hand. "The sheriff," Pickering explained, "and our business is rather personal." He glanced at Stoddard, who looked at me. "Mr. Stoddard will do me the kindness to remain," I said, and took my stand beside the chaplain. "Oh!" Pickering ejaculated scornfully. "I didn't understand that you had established relations with the neighboring clergy. Your taste is improving, Glenarm." "Mr. Glenarm is a friend of mine," remarked Stoddard quietly. "A very particular friend," he added. "I congratulate you both." I laughed. Pickering was surveying the room as he spoke, and Stoddard suddenly stepped toward him, merely, I think, to draw up a chair for the sheriff, but Pickering, not hearing Stoddard's step on the soft rug until the clergyman was close beside him, started perceptibly and reddened. It was certainly ludicrous, and when Stoddard faced me again he was biting his lip.